Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes for folks to file in, but we're excited to get started shortly. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. And as folks trickle in, we can continue on our discussion. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn Gruber. I am the Deputy Director of the Environmental Security Program here at the Stimson Center, and we are so pleased to have a wonderful suite of panelists here to talk through the results of our Climate and Ocean Risk Vulnerability Initiative, which we call CORVI for short, which we just completed in Toamasina, Madagascar. So first, I'll hand it over to JB Kelly, who is the U.S. chapter president of the Prince Albert II Foundation. JB.
Good morning. It is both, well, afternoon for those in Madagascar. It is both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today as a representative of the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, which has proudly co-funded this vital research. Together, we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to supporting developing nations and island states in their journey to build climate resilience. Our dedication is motivated by both necessity of a deep sense of solidarity, acknowledging that those who contribute the least to climate change often face its harshest consequences. The CORVI report presented today on measuring multidimensional climate risks in Madagascar offers a sobering yet essential insight into the formidable challenges faced by numerous communities. It highlights the urgent need to address sea level rise, poverty, disaster risk, all of which conspire to threaten the livelihoods, safety, and futures of countless individuals. Under the visionary leadership of Prince Albert II of Monaco, his foundation has for nearly 2 decades embraced the belief that action is not merely a responsibility, but a moral imperative. Our commitment is rooted in a vision of equitable and sustainable development, where each nation, regardless of size or economic status, can withstand and adapt to the inevitable climate shifts. We are resolute in our dedication to leveraging our resources, expertise, and partnerships to support policies and projects that enhance resilience and empower communities to proactively and effectively adapt. Together, let us pledge to deepen our collaboration and accelerate our efforts. By working in unison, we can transform this vision into a tangible reality, ensuring a more resilient and sustainable future for developing nations and island states worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JP. And now I'll play a video from our CORVI partners in country. So our the Ministry of Madagascar's Ministry of Fisheries and Blue Economy. I'll just quickly share my screen.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Ministry of Fisheries and Blue Economy of Madagascar, I'd like to thank our Stimson Center team and the US Department for their initiative to implement a CORVI study in Toamasina, Madagascar. For us, as a representative of the government, the choice of Toamasina is really reasonable as the first pillar of the blue economy in Madagascar with its principal port. Toamasina is also Madagascar's first largest coastal city. It's clear that the city of Toamasina is vulnerable with the extreme weather relating to the climate change, such as cyclones, sea level rise, and floods. The economic activities of the population are annually disturbed during a significant, unlimited period. Having said that, the CORVI studies in Toamasina is an available decision-making, an available tool for the government, the ministry, and the municipality of Toamasina for facing that and those impacts of the climate change in this city. This CORVI study brought some recommendations which help our leaders to overcome our issues of vulnerability in Toamasina. For ending my intervention, on behalf of the government of Madagascar, we are calling our financial and technical partners, our donors, all investors, all NGOs, and CSO to put together to set up a sustainable blue economy and a sustainable ocean governance in Madagascar through this robust document, CORVI. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really helpful way to dive into this work. I'll first give a little bit of an overview and a scene setting approach here to describe a little bit about the CORVI process, why we chose Toamasina, and the work that we've done so far. So as some of you know, Toamasina is the second largest city in Madagascar and is the port city through which 80 to 90% of all goods goes through. So a pretty essential place. It's located right on the coast. We have a pretty substantial expansion of the port under development now. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of building resilience for this very important place. And the CORVI process, I think, is very special in a few different ways. So it is a holistic assessment. So we look across various types of risk: ecological risk, economic risk, and social risk. And we combine all those together to calculate a risk score. And this is a relative risk score, so it allows us to be able to compare across other places. And I think that's one of the another important component of the CORVI process is that it is place-based. So it's very focused on a specific city, in this case, Madagascar's port city, Toamasina. We've also completed some CORVIs that look across all small islands. And then the comprehensive risk scores can be very useful in terms of pulling together data. So we collect data across all of these three different risk factors: ecological, economic, and social risk factors. as they are connected to climate impacts. And then using our methodology, we fill those data gaps to create a suite of actionable insights in a place where usually data is a little bit hard to come by. So the CORVI process takes place over the course of about 18 months. We work really closely with our local partners. In this case, it was the Ministry of Fisheries and Blue Economy. And we work very closely to create community-driven data sets and then calculate those risk scores. And I can give a little flavor for what those risks looked like for Toamasina. In particular, we assessed the increasing frequency and intensity of flooding. We also noted the threats to the sustainable blue economy. As our colleague Rado just described, it is important for Toamasina to build a sustainable blue economy and to support and maintain its existing marine and ocean ecosystems. There are also high rates of poverty in Toamasina, and we've also assessed the lack of coordination and information sharing, which is a common occurrence in most governments, I would say, but an important role here. So I think what I'll do is turn to our illustrious panelists. First, I'll do a quick introduction for each. So we'll start with Chris Sari, who is the Acting Chief Climate Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And then we'll turn to Deirdre DeVos, who is the Marine Conservation Program Manager for the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. Then we'll turn to Alexander Nasikas, who is the Senior Advisor in the Office of the Special Envoy for Climate at the U.S. Department of State. So first, I'll turn it over to Chris for our first question to get us started here. So Chris, in your role and in your office, could you speak a little bit to the work that you support in terms of building climate resilience in small island developing states and coastal communities? And if you could give us a flavor of why this work is so important to you and your team, we would love to hear a little bit more broadly about how you play in this space.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good morning, good afternoon to our online audience. First, I want to thank the Simpson Center, for organizing this important discussion, and I want to congratulate you on launching the Climate and Ocean Risk Assessment. The report highlights how climate risks such as sea level rise and worsening floods are compounding existing challenges facing Toamasina, like rapid urbanization, urban poverty, and waste management. And these challenges, of course, are not unique to Madagascar. Around the world, we are seeing similar challenges playing out in other coastal communities and island states, both large and small. Worldwide, the risks to coastal communities are taking on greater importance for two reasons. First, climate change is intensifying, and the risks are becoming more severe. And second, a greater number of people are living in coastal communities. Some 35 to 40% of the world populations now live in or near coastal communities, and that number is only growing. This makes coastal communities important to be more resilient for global security and economic prosperity. And when we talk about resilience, it's not just about the risk of sudden shocks like tropical storms. We also really need to focus in on slow onset changes like sea level rise, declining fish stocks, loss of coral reefs, and changing rainfall patterns, which threaten food security, water security, and economic security. So let me tell you a little bit more about what USAID is doing. First is greater opportunities for mobilizing coastal and marine financing. Just in climate financing alone, less than 5% of it is going to climate adaptation. So more funding that we can bring into adaptation, and then specifically to coastal and marine finance, is really critical. At COP29, USAID committed $3.2 million to invest in and mobilize climate finance for marine environments and coastal communities. Through the Coastal Resilience, Carbon, and Conservation Finance Initiative with our anchor partner, Aura, USAID is working globally to drive investment in blue carbon and coastal resilient projects that benefit local communities. We're seeking to develop the Nautilus Blue Guarantee Corporate Company, which seeks to de-risk investments in blue economy sectors, which I know you mentioned is very important to Toamasina. And through the Enterprise for Development, Growth and Empowerment, or as we know it, EDGE Fund, USAID is helping stand up the Outrigger Impact Fund, with the aim to drive $500 million of investment into coastal and marine natural capital and increase the resilience of at least 50 million vulnerable coastal people. We believe that by investing in key ocean sectors, Outrigger will be a source of blended capital that can deliver at scale and will help enable the conditions for both private and public sector engagement in supporting climate adaptation solutions in coastal communities. Second, I want to mention nature-based solutions for adaptation. We know that restoring and conserving natural infrastructure like mangroves, coral reefs, coastal wetlands can provide a buffer against storms and floods while also providing a wide range of benefits. USAID, in fact, recently announced RIACE, or C, as it's called, a 5-year project to ensure that resilient, empowered communities inherit and maintain biodiverse marine ecosystems in Madagascar. Over 5 years, RIACE aims to improve conditions of over 700,000 hectares of biologically significant coastal and marine areas, including both mangroves and coral reefs. So, for example, when we protect mangroves that are critical to Madagascar's coastal communities, we can help them serve as buffers to cyclones, functioning as nurseries for fisheries for crucial food and economic security, while also storing significant amounts of carbon, which contribute to Madagascar's status as one of 8 net zero emitting countries. And I apologize, it's 7 a.m. in the morning, so I'm still waking up. Third, let me just mention our work with coastal communities and municipal governments on climate resilience. So just going back to what I said, 35 to 40% of the world's populations is living in coastal communities. And those coastal communities are growing. 84 out of the world's 100 fastest growing cities are classified as extreme risk due to climate change. So coastal communities are swelling. We're stretching government's resources, planning, and infrastructure at the same time these places are becoming more vulnerable to climate impacts. By 2050, the effects of sea level rise and greater storm surge will cost coastal urban areas more than $1 trillion and affect more than 800 million people. Those are pretty startling statistics. So we really need to work with coastal communities and local governments on everything from strengthening their capacity for assessing climate and disaster risk to addressing institutional barriers to mobilizing finance for resilient infrastructure. And I'll give you just one example from the Philippines, where we're investing $15 million in climate resilient city projects in 6 cities across the archipelago. And we're seeing some very promising results. Similarly, the RIACE project in Madagascar will work with the government on conducting risk assessments in coastal communities, developing blue carbon markets, and tapping into other sources of climate finance, developing adaptation plans with local communities to help them respond to climate risks and build resilience in the face of increasing disaster. So thank you very much for this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about USAID work, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our other speakers.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I completely understand it is 7 o'clock in the morning. Barely alive over here, but we're working on it. Okay, so this is a really helpful sort of approach to zoom out a little bit and understand how USAID is investing in coastal communities and the different flavors of work that you're supporting. I think I would encourage all the folks online to take a look at the RIACE project, as well as the work that USAID is doing in the Philippines. I know our CORVI assessment in Dagupan in the Philippines was a really useful way to sort of dive into the issues related to flooding in some of those important cities. And I think, Chris, you are exactly right. Those statistics about the role of sea level rise and the cost of sea level rise by 2050 is going to really affect urban areas on the coastal plains. I think That is especially the case in Madagascar, and particularly for Toamasina. And as its primary port city, that is a real challenge that needs to be addressed. And in our assessment, flooding was our primary risk, and we prepared a series of different recommendations to sort of think through that and plan the community to deal with that. So I'll turn it over to Deirdre DeVos, who is our Marine Conservation Program Manager for the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, who is a close partner of ours in many of our CORVI assessments, particularly in East Africa. Deirdre, I would love to hear a little bit more about the work that WIOMSA does in terms of promoting marine and coastal science in the region, and how that fits into the CORVI process as we've worked so well together in the past.
Thanks, Carolyn, and I would like to echo that I'm very thankful to be here today with you and representing WIOMSA, the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. So WIOMSA has been promoting regional collaboration in marine science for the past 30 years in the WIO. We work in 10 countries as recognized under the Nairobi Convention. So if you kind of start up in East Africa and Somalia and you follow the coastline down, it would include Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, South Africa, and then also Comoros, some of the other islands, Reunion, Seychelles, of course, Madagascar. Yeah, and what WIOMSA essentially does is we have 3 thematic pillars that we focus on. It's science, society, and policy. So WIOMSA improves knowledge through scientific research and then shares that knowledge with society and integrates that knowledge through policy. And this policy integration happens at a national and a regional level. At the regional level, we work with the Nairobi Convention, which is a regional intergovernmental organization under UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Programme. And then nationally, we've also worked with various governments across the WIO. Taking this further, WIOMSA understands the importance of integrating research into policy as it promotes action. We do have a thematic focus in our science on climate change, and I think that's how we came together to be partners in this endeavor. And we also do focus a lot on capacity building and awareness raising to increase competence development and learning in the region. So some of the research we focus on is ecology and fisheries, particularly illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing within the region, pollution and coastal development, marine litter and ocean acidification, and climate change, as I mentioned. And so, as you said, we've worked together before on some of the CORVI assessments, but estimating climate vulnerability in the WIO region has been very difficult given the severe knowledge gaps. So without sufficient data or knowledge of existing data, developing coastal cities who are especially vulnerable to climate change cannot plan to mitigate these risks. And this is where CORVI really shines. CORVI helps to address this issue specifically, as you also mentioned, Carolyn, by filling data gaps, assisting with the packaging of this knowledge for better access and use, and acting as a tool to process knowledge into direct action. So we've worked together on 2 CORVI assessments in the WIO region, the one being for the city of Mombasa in Kenya, and the other being the city of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And if we look at Mombasa as an example of how the CORVI results has been very useful, the CORVI results has actually been used to formulate the Mombasa climate change and adaptation policy in 2021. And further to that, it's been very useful for port planning in Mombasa. So CORVI approaches port city framework centered on coastal and marine sustainability. And this has been used in some port planning in Mombasa. And there's a paper that's been published on this that I'd be very happy to share with the audience after the fact. And then if we look at Dar es Salaam, the CORVI results were actually used to develop the local biodiversity strategy and action plan. And this was done through their local governments for sustainability and the Dar es Salaam City Council. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we came together and what WIOMSA's part to play is in the CORVI assessment. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. And yes, you are exactly right in terms of our partnership in East Africa, and in terms of some of the key risks in Toamasina. Your note about the issue related to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is a poignant one in terms of, especially in Madagascar, fisheries catch in Madagascar, I think, is underreported by at least 40%, and fisheries catch potential is projected to decline by almost 7% by 2050 compared to 2000. So, and as a coastal community, fisheries plays an important role in many folks' livelihoods. And so this is something that we are certainly concerned about, and which was raised in our research. So for our next question, I'll turn to Alexander Nasikas, who is the Senior Advisor for the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate at the U.S. Department of State. Xander, can you give us a sense of the role of your office more broadly and how your work links to the findings of the CORVI assessment in Toamasina? What do you see as most helpful to policymakers, to decision makers, both in the region and more broadly?
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much. Big thanks to the Stimson Center for bringing us together today, and definitely join others in congratulating you on launching this important CORVI assessment. So thanks for the intro. Our office, more broadly, has been very focused on pursuing the goals of the Paris Agreement in individual countries under the agreement itself, and other international institutions like the IMO, the IEA, and through less formal initiatives like the Green Shipping Challenge. This includes raising ambition of nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement that are necessary for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, with a particular focus on the major economies. At the same time, we know climate impacts are already underway, so we're very focused on advancing adaptation efforts. On adaptation and resilience, the U.S. government is focused on supporting the most vulnerable communities to address and manage the impacts of climate change. And island nations and coastal communities are one of our highest priorities. And we hear often from them that adaptation is their highest priority. So we're working to respond to these requests through the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE. I wanted to also mention that the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, or ORA, is one key implementing partner of PREPARE. And through ORA, we supported this CORVI assessment done by Stimson Center through the, also together with the Ministry of Fisheries and Blue Economy of Madagascar and the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, to assess vulnerability to climate impacts here in Toamasina. So there's many things I could highlight about how important this type of risk assessment is, but I wanted to speak to one dimension in particular, and that is sea level rise. You've already mentioned it a little bit. As we've already heard, rapid sea level rise and coastal flooding threaten Toamasina, the second largest city and principal port, and its critical road and rail connections to the rest of the country. I think what's helpful for policymakers is that the CORVI compares a diverse range of ecological, economic, social, and political risks with 94 climate indicators to produce a detailed place-based risk assessment for Toamasina with recommendations for action. So focusing on sea level rise, it showed that it's the second highest level of risk in the assessment, given the projected impacts on the city's road network and single rail connecting Toamasina to the rest of the country. The projected levels of sea level rise just over the next 26 years could undermine both roads in the city and the single rail. So for policymakers and city officials, it's important to have these kinds of risk assessments in place, so that Madagascar's government and city officials can integrate these risks into their short and long-term development planning. Hope that answers your question. Thanks.
It does. That's super helpful. I think the focus on sea level rise is particularly essential for this work, and for Toamasina in particular. In addition to sea level rise, we in our research we discovered that flooding as a result of just heavy rainfall, as well as driven by sea level rise in terms of the intensity of tropical cyclones, is going to be a real problem, which is all compounded by the limited solid waste and wastewater management infrastructure. So this is something that I think our colleagues in the Ministry of Fisheries and Blue Economy can work towards, along with their partners throughout their government. And not just at the national level, but also at the municipal level. We had a great partnership with the mayor of Toamasina, who was really, really focused on action and taking the report and the recommendations, which I can give a little bit of flavor to. We had three sort of buckets of recommendations. One was focused on implementing an integrated flood management and adaptation strategy. The next was to promote the health of existing coastal and marine ecosystems. And then the third was to invest in climate resilient infrastructure and economic growth. And I think we've heard that from both the folks in Madagascar's government, as well as the stakeholders we consulted during the process. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience, and I have some of my own questions. So I'll switch over to, I'll sort of mix them in together here. So first, I think it would be helpful for us to think through the how investing in protecting Toamasina's coastal and marine ecosystems is pretty essential in this work. And in Toamasina, it's pretty particular in terms of coral reefs, seagrass beds, and coastal forests. These are essential natural resources. And so maybe Deirdre, you would be the best person to answer this first, but I welcome the thoughts of other panelists. What are some examples of supporting and restoring coastal ecosystems in the region that Toamasina could replicate or take on themselves?
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, there's a number of examples of restoration and protection efforts across the region. So I'm just going to kind of fly through a few of these examples. One of the first ones is Nature Seychelles Reef Rescuers Project that started over a decade ago to combat climate change-induced coral bleaching in the Seychelles. And it's been showcasing various successes. And I welcome, again, as I mentioned, some of the links to some of these projects that I'll be mentioning now. There's also Reefolutions. It's the first coral restoration initiative in Kenya, and it has actually evolved into one of Africa mainland's largest coral restoration efforts. And then, of course, there's formal protection of various kinds of habitats through the marine protected areas of the Western Indian Ocean. We have around 143. And then we also have locally managed marine areas. In the region, we've some data and mapped some of these areas. There's about 300 now that we've been able to map. And I think it's important to note that restoration efforts, like mangrove restoration in particular, forms an integral part of how some of these LMMAs aim to improve fisheries. And there's a big collaboration effort across the region currently to formally recognize LMMAs, or locally managed marine areas. We actually had our first regional LMMA forum in September this year in Madagascar to formulate strategies towards this. And we were actually very lucky because we had our Honorable Minister Pobert join us for that. And Madagascar, actually, I know you said what is examples that Madagascar could potentially replicate, but we're learning a lot about LMMAs from Madagascar and the model that they employ there. And then there's also a number of guidelines that are available to restore seagrass, mangroves, and coral reefs. And they're available under the publications section of the WAMSA website. And I think, Carolyn and Natalie, you also included that in your recommendations under the promotion of restoring ecosystems, that bucket of recommendations. I think it's a very valuable resource. And then towards a regional mangrove vision and action plan for the Western Indian Ocean, there's a synthesis report by WWF Madagascar, where they actually highlight current policy and practices, and also have included some recommendations on mangroves in that particular synthesis report. And then there's a very big program or project called WireCore, which is the Western Indian Ocean Coastal and Ocean Resilience Program. It's supported by the French Facility for Global Environment. And this aims to advance locally impactful, regionally relevant seagrass action and governance under the Great Blue Wall Initiative of IUCN. And YCOR supports 5 seascapes, which includes Madagascar, but also Comoros, Mozambique, Kenya, and Tanzania, through direct support on seagrass conservation and science, and convenes regional efforts towards governance and harmonization of monitoring and conservation protocols. And they also have a big component of integrating communities into these efforts under the blue economy. And then there's a new initiative by the Pew Charitable Trust, where they're going to map seagrass and set up management protocols to develop a field verified seagrass map for the Wire region. It's also going to target 4 countries, which also includes Madagascar. It's Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Madagascar. And this map will serve as a critical baseline to enhance conservation and management efforts across the region, supporting countries in integrating seagrass into policies such as the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. IUCN has also started a new initiative where they're going to create a red list of seagrass ecosystems in the Wire region. I think it's a very useful database for us. And then, of course, all these efforts will assist in the development of a regional seagrass status report. And we also, as WIMS, are integrating it into our research grants, which includes MASMA and MOG, to have particular grants given towards seagrass science, and particularly community-led seagrass projects in the target countries. So that's in a nutshell.
It's a really big nutshell. There's a lot going on. I'm very grateful for you sharing that. And I'll make sure that we include links to those on the website of the event so that folks who want to watch the event later can sort of link to those. Because I think it would be really helpful to sort of have a little spot for all of that good information. And Deirdre, I just wanted to follow up. Has there been, I know a lot of these projects are just starting, but have there been any outcomes in terms of how these projects have supported sustainable blue economy in the region? What are some of the successes?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Like I said, all of these projects are kind of in their infancy stage. But what I would advise potentially is to look at some of the outcomes under the Great Blue Wall, under the IUCN initiative. A big factor or part of that initiative is building a blue economy. And I know that they have some outcomes listed there. And it is also a very collaborative regional overview of some of the blue economy efforts that's been made in the region. So I would say we should refer to some of those reports that have come out. I think they are available under the IUCN website, just under Great Blue Wall.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. I want to give our other panelists a chance to weigh in on that, but if not, I can turn to another question. All right. So let's see. This is a question from our audience in terms of maybe this is the best for Xander to take first, and then we can have our other panelists weigh in. Lack of coordination between and among government agencies and ministries is something that is commonplace across many different communities. Are there best practices or good examples of intra-government coordination that we could probably all learn from, but that Madagascar could employ in particular?
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So two examples come to mind, at least from the US perspective. And I'd point, given that CORVI is focused on assessment of risks and vulnerability, I'd point to the US Global Change Research Program and its coordination of the National Climate Assessment. I think that's been a very effective and important mechanism for coordination. Another less formal working group that connects technical experts across different agencies. And these kinds of less formal working groups can be very effective, and I've definitely seen that. But one in particular is the Interagency Task Force on Sea Level Change, and that includes experts from key federal agencies, and has been very helpful on that issue. So two quick examples there.
Yes, exactly. I think that's really helpful in terms of our work in the CORVI assessments. we routinely come across this challenge related to coordination and who to work with and how often. In terms of our work in Madagascar, we had the chance to meet with several different ministries and understand their role in climate resilience a little bit more clearly. I'm really grateful for your input there, Xander. I'm curious whether Deirdre and Chris have any thoughts on strengthening coordination between and among agencies and stakeholders.
So Carolyn, I'd be happy to add something in, and just from USAID's experience, one of the things that we often think about is climate change separate, but we acknowledge that climate change, if we don't address it, will undermine development and humanitarian assistance. So we've really taken a broad systems approach to looking at climate change. And I think when you take that approach, kind of what you were mentioning with CORVI and looking across the different ministries, you'll foster intragovernment and intergovernment work together. So if you don't look at a health issue just as a medical issue, but how it has a basis in where people live, how it's impacted by economic development, economic security, you by nature kind of bring in other partners for the work that you're doing.
That's a really great point. We've just started integrating health indicators into our CORVI assessment, given the role that extreme heat and drought can have on non-communicable diseases like heart disease, preterm birth, other issues related to pregnancy. I think it's something that's really interesting, and it seems to be an emerging field of research in terms of the health impacts of climate change. And I think it's a good microcosm of how integrating different agencies and the roles that and mandates that are sort of cross-cutting is important. I'll take one question from our audience here. If I see one from let's see, we've got the CORVI assessment offers a holistic view of risk, including recommendations to reduce vulnerability and to build resilience. What are the findings from the report that surprised you or caught your eye for future work? And someone from our audience, I'll merge this question in. In particular, is there any scope for Madagascar to learn from other regions, including South Asia, in particular India, and then other regions in the role? Maybe I'll turn to Chris first for that one.
Thanks, Carolyn, for that. And also, I just wanted to go back. I mean, what Deirdre said, that kind of whole very comprehensive list of efforts taking place is it's truly incredible. We haven't focused nearly enough on the marine or coastal areas, and so the fact that that work is taking place in Africa, I think, is great. We really cannot lose sight about what's happening with population growth and the shift from rural to urban migration, and just how important it is. I don't know that I think anything, unfortunately, surprised me either in terms of the findings or the recommendations, because I think we keep hearing this play out over and over again in coastal communities and on island nations as well. And I think there's a lot of actual learning that can take place between different countries on this type of issues. But again, I'm going to go back to something I just spoke to. It's really important when we look at it, whether it's infrastructure, economic security, to look at a systems approach for the work. So in Toamasina, just with some of the results that you did, we often talk about gray infrastructure and green infrastructure, and we don't think about how we're going to plan those efforts together. And when we can think about how does our infrastructure impact our natural environment, how does that actually have an impact in, let's say, in coastal community on our food systems? If we look up at that bigger picture, we can find solutions that really go across different sectors. One that's kind of coming to mind is it's in Thailand, where there's a lot of efforts with experiencing sea level rise, extreme floods, about building what they're calling more spongy cities, where they look at how do you build natural ecosystems into your gray infrastructure, so that if you have a flooding situation, there's wetlands, there's parks that can actually absorb that water, retain it, and also at other times serve as green areas in communities, or even places where you can plant crops as well. So I think really needing to have a bit of a mind shift where we think much more in terms of a systems approach with our work is key. And then going back to something that Xander, said, we're in a place now where we really need to be talking about adaptation. Even if we're able to keep temperatures below that 1.5 degrees Celsius, we know that climate change is having its impacts, and we need to adapt to those. And so making sure that we're not thinking about climate change as something we come to later, or as something that we need more resources to address. We need to now just make it, unfortunately, a fundamental part of how we think about development and humanitarian assistance to countries. Thank you.
Very well said. Any other additional thoughts from Deirdre or Xander?
Yeah, I mean, I would say similar to Chris, nothing didn't particularly surprise me. I think I'm always overwhelmed when I understand these multiple challenges, and that it comes down to a single government to have to negotiate all these different challenges. And I mean, Toamasina as a city is particularly challenging. We know that just the way the infrastructure is set up, with the big channel going through the city, and so many of the coastal communities living adjacent to that. So when flooding happens, that channel immediately overflows. And as you also mentioned in the report, a lot of the waste is just being pumped directly into the channel, which also has a lot of health repercussions. But something we've seen in other regions that might be useful in the city of Toamasina is an integrated coastal zone. And I think this is, as Chris also said, a way to think systematically about your problem, because that kind of plan incorporates, something like the port that's being developed, but also addresses, better conservation efforts for those key biodiversity areas that could help us mitigate the risks. So something like an integrated coastal management plan is quite useful. And also bringing on board ecosystem-based management planning and how we plan, different projects or other endeavors in the city, I think is important.
I think that's exactly right. And I think having, integrated coastal zone management and ecosystems based approaches and nature-based solutions can all be and are necessary to that systems approach that Chris described. I think we've got another couple of questions, taking a look at the time here. Given the pressures of overfishing and deforestation in Toamasina, this is from one of our audience members, how can alternative livelihoods be promoted to reduce ecological damage? And I can weigh in here in terms of the coastal forests and deforestation that is having an impact downstream in Toamasina. What role can external partners play in supporting these efforts, and how can they help make sure that these alternative livelihoods are culturally appropriate and sustainable for local communities? Maybe we can turn to Deirdre for that answer first, and then to our other players.
Yeah, the development of alternative livelihood strategies is something that has been happening in the region for some time, some with more success than others. I think what's very important is to have a thorough understanding of the context of the communities that you're trying to support, and not trying to introduce something completely foreign, but rather building on what some community members are already doing and strengthening that processes. I'm going to go back to the locally managed marine areas, because we've seen some success there. As I mentioned, a lot of the conservation components around building LMMAs focuses on restoration. not so much coral reef because there's some technical and financial support that's required for those initiatives. But again, there's many other success stories in the region of how we can support coral reef restoration and particularly seagrass as well. So in terms of the coastal forest, I would imagine that there's some lessons to learn around restoration and actually employing local communities in those projects that we hope to roll out.
Any other comments from our panelists?
Carolyn, I'll just add one thing. I think Deirdre said it very well, but we spend a lot of time now talking about the blue economy, and I think as we turn more of our eyes to focus on the blue economy, making sure that social inclusion and equity is a key part of the work we're doing is very important. So that what we don't do is, create new jobs that that local community residents are not able to participate in, or in turn forces somebody out of what is already a local job and that is culturally appropriate. And so really making sure we embed that in our work is key.
Fantastic. I have I'm going to merge a couple questions from our audience online. So first, how do you tailor climate resilient solutions to local needs and ensure and sort of build in local buy-in and long-term sustainability of programming? And how does that approach, how will we take that approach from here with our CORVI recommendations? Does anyone want to start?
I'll start at a very macro level from USAID's perspective. One of the administrators' key priorities is localization. And that's really the idea that as we look to development and humanitarian assistance projects, local communities best know what the challenges are they facing and the solutions are as well. So what USAID is really doing is, as we look at our comprehensive plans, as we look towards climate adaptation and mitigation work, is making sure that we're very focused locally and trying to give the funding that we have for development and humanitarian assistance to local groups for the work that's taking place.
Yeah, I would have to say start with the data, what the data is showing. So I think that's the strength of this whole process, is that we now have a whole subset of data to really understand the local context. And I think when we say local, that can also be interpreted in many ways. So if we talk about local government, we've seen that the CORVI results can actually really assist local government in making decisions, as in the case of Dar es Salaam, where they were able to do their local biodiversity management plan. But then if we talk about local communities, I think I would kind of come back to my previous comments and try and understand first what local communities need and what their needs are in terms of resources, and then see how that can tie into climate adaptation processes and projects.
Any comments for that one, Xander? I think we can take one more question. If not, go ahead.
Well, just would absolutely agree with Chris and Deirdre, the importance of these projects being locally led and locally owned. And to Deirdre's point, the importance of data. So I think when you look at our approach from the US government, we're trying to do both at the same time. And this is true in work that we've done in the Pacific and the Caribbean, sort of all over, but just wanted to underscore that point. Thanks.
Okay, fantastic. I'll take one more question from our audience about the role of the US government and other wealthy nations in building support to reduce disaster, to reduce the impacts of natural disasters and improve disaster risk management. In Toamasina, I think in a 13-month period, they experienced 6 cyclones, whereas the average for Madagascar per year is 3 to 4 cyclones. Toamasina in particular was hit by 6 from a period of January 2022 to February 2023. So clearly a real risk. I'm curious about the role of the US government and other wealthy nations in supporting disaster risk management. Maybe Chris, we can start with you and then turn to Xander.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think just coming off of COP29, which was the finance COP, a couple of key announcements that came from the US. And Xander, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder on this one, but just, President Biden was announced that the US had reached its commitment of $11 billion to support climate financing, including $3 billion for adaptation. And I think that those are really key figures. Some of the work that I did is we do need to help find ways to support financing to developing countries, not just public financing, but how can public financing really leverage private financing as well. One of the things that we announced at COP29 was we had our 40th company, join the Prepare Call to Action. The private sector is really seeing a need to make investments in adaptation. In fact, every dollar invested in adaptation, we can save somewhere between $3 and $10 in terms of development and humanitarian assistance. And so really continuing to support developing nations on a just energy transition and providing climate financing to support adaptation, I think is key.
Xander, anything else?
Sure. No, that's great. Absolutely agree with Chris. And the tireless efforts you pointed out that the U.S. and other parties did to reach consensus at COP29. I think just to zero in on one particular way, we can support building resilience and improving disaster preparedness and response is through multi-hazard early warning systems. And this is a line of effort that we are trying to strengthen and expand in support of the UN Secretary General's goal to close the early warning gap. And so I just think that's one important line of effort. It saves lives, and I think we've also seen the importance of interoperability of different early warning systems. So it's a lot of the work that we do is focused on that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I just came back from Belize City, where we are just completing another CORVI assessment, and interoperability of early warning systems came up many, many times, and the role that has in reducing risk and allowing for timely evacuations and access to communities that are often the most vulnerable in these situations. A really helpful comment. So I'll close this out and say thank you to our esteemed panelists and to JB for welcoming us to this somewhat early morning for some of us. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you all. We'll have this event posted on a recording posted on our website, and I'll make sure we send along some links as well to all of our participants. Thank you all again for being with us. This has been really helpful. And I do encourage you to take a look at the report, go through our recommendations and see where you and your partners can help us take the next steps.